What's going on, everybody? We're starting this day off relatively red. Bitcoin, the Bitcoin miners aren't much different. We've got a few green, but for the majority are all red. Now, we do have some concerns, economic concerns. The Atlanta Fed expects a negative GDP. And on March 3rd, their estimate for real GDP growth in the first quarter is negative 2.8%. which is down more from negative 1.5% posted on February 28. You might be wondering, how accurate is this Bank of Atlanta? These are just projections, right? Well, according to the robots, this model's average error in forecasting GDP growth is about 0.77 percentage points. But also, its accuracy improves as the time between the forecast and GDP release shortens. So as we get closer to the GDP date, the Atlanta Fed model is typically even more accurate. And GDP is going to be releasing on March 27. So a little bit under a month away from now. And one thing that's been going on is risk on has been just selling off. Bitcoin is failing as a safe haven asset as gold soars amid Trump tariff trade tensions. And as of Tuesday, today, gold prices surged to $2,915 per ounce, getting closer and closer to last week's record high of $2,950. And while some say and argue that Bitcoin's a safe haven asset, it can do well against economic uncertainty, against inflation, I tend to agree with this oldest we'll just call him oldest T, the PayBus chief revenue officer. Bitcoin has never truly been a safe haven asset, only an aspirational one. Yet the promise remains, and with every cycle, critics revisit this so-called failure. But my perspective is that Bitcoin has constantly been a risk asset. However, he also added that Bitcoin is on a long-term trajectory towards becoming a safe haven asset. Regardless of all this adoption, regardless of all these positive developments, regardless of how bullish Blackrock is, regardless of how bullish the president is, regardless of potentially seeing a US strategic reserve, a state-based strategic reserve, Bitcoin is still a risk-on asset. Bitcoin is still speculative. Bitcoin will go up a lot during times of hype, and Bitcoin will fall a lot during times of fear. It has not yet reached a market cap that also provides it more stability. And while I don't think necessarily that Bitcoin has to get to gold's market cap to be seen as a safe haven asset, I do think as the years progress, as the cycles progress, and as Bitcoin's market cap continues to grow cycle over cycle, it will become less speculative, it will become less risky, less volatile, and we will see diminishing returns, yes, but we will also see less painful bear markets. But yeah, right now there's this Bank of America field manager study from February that indicated only 3% of fund managers view Bitcoin as a reliable store of value amid trade tensions, while 58% favored gold. And here's the chart. As time goes by, Bitcoin will be seen more as a safe asset, and to me it's already impressive that it's at 3%. We are still so early. Now, it's not all just doom and gloom. We do have some positive news coming from the spot Bitcoin ETFs. The Bitcoin ETFs finally snapped their 8-day, $3.2 billion outflow streak with 94 million in inflows. Oh, geez. There have been some interesting things happening behind the scenes, or things that people might not be noticing. Cardano's doing all right today. I find this kind of surprising that while Bitcoin's down 12%, altcoins by the top 20 fell by 15.8%. They're almost about the same as Bitcoin in terms of performance over the past week. You would think altcoins would be down much more significantly. Is this a sign of altcoin season coming? Now, looking at Bitcoin dominance, it has been cooling it down a little bit ever since it hit 65% nearly. But look at this trend, it follows above this trend, has recently found it as resistance, broke over it briefly, but right now it is still resistance. We saw this last cycle in terms of Bitcoin dominance. It rode this trend before finding it as resistance. Keep an eye on Bitcoin dominance. In my opinion, if we get to 65%, I'd be very surprised. Look at this on Bitcoin dominance. So this is where alt season started, March, April. We saw dominance just fall off a cliff, and the altcoins rallied. Bitcoin dominance dropped massively. Altcoins gained that dominance. Bitcoin dominance dropped while altcoins rallied more so than Bitcoin during alt season. And this is why we saw Bitcoin dominance fall off a cliff. This is very similar if you ask me. Last cycle, we saw Bitcoin dominance hit 73%, went on to go a teeny bit higher before dropping off a cliff. We got that new cycle high, the pullback, and then it went slightly higher. Is this where things start dropping off? It would line up perfectly in terms of timeline. Right here when things start falling off was right in March of 2021. Maybe things play out slightly different. Maybe Bitcoin keeps its dominance, or at least a much stronger dominance than what we saw last cycle in terms of the drop. But, considering this potential crypto strategic reserve that also includes altcoins, I do think this is something that can kick off altcoin season. But as there's economic fear, as there's recession fear, potentially negative GDP, risk on assets aren't going to do as good. That's my opinion. That's one thing to consider. That if the economy just absolutely tanks, I do think alt season will be very muted. And the fact that there's so many alts out there, it's so oversaturated, you're definitely going to have to pick your alts very carefully, in my opinion. All right, now we do have another piece of news to look at in terms of BlackRock and Bitcoin. BlackRock recommends a Bitcoin allocation with addition to its model portfolio. And this is the first time BlackRock's adding IBIT to any of its model portfolios. Analysts are suggesting that although the models BlackRock added IBIT to were some of its low-end funds and assets under management, it's still a big deal for Bitcoin. And Brain Rose, unless this is misspelled and it's supposed to be Brian, Brain Rose, the host of London Real, stated that the development looks more significant than it seems. And BlackRock model portfolios guide billions of funds as large investors copy them for allocation. Furthermore, he suggested that it could stir other asset managers to pursue a similar ploy, increasing inflows into Bitcoin. Robert Mitchnick, BlackRock's head of digital asset research, stated that the asset manager would focus on attracting institutions and wealth managers to adopt Bitcoin. Now, keep an eye on employment data this week. There is going to be a lot of employment data coming out. We have ISM manufacturing data on Wednesday, ADP employment survey on Wednesday. Thursday, we have initial unemployment insurance claims report. Friday, we have non-farm payrolls, unemployment rate, January consumer credit. As for Bitcoin right now, it's kind of hanging under its 200 EMA. And here's something interesting that we saw in our last pullback with Mt. Gox when we went from 73 down to 49. We did see some of the EMAs cross. We didn't see the red or the 200 cross anything, but we did see the yellow or the 50 cross the 100, which is this green one here. So if we do see these flip, I wouldn't be too fearful. We did see this in our last pullback, which in hindsight was in fact a buying opportunity. We have not revisited any of these prices yet. Could we in the future? Of course. But when you follow the cycle, you realize that these pullbacks are buying opportunities. And I do personally think this pullback is another buying opportunity. Bitcoin went right up to its 50 EMA before we took all those gains back that we made on Sunday night. Bitcoin is basically back to where it was on Saturday. Now, I do want to show you that we had a beautiful divergence on the 4-hour on Bitcoin, and we did get a nice reversal. We saw the price continuing down while the RSI was picking up. Keep an eye on these divergences. This was on the 4-hour, but one thing we are seeing on the hourly, it would be nice to be on a larger time frame, but we are seeing that the price is cooling still while the RSI has been picking up. It would be nice to see on larger time frames, like I said, but this is a positive sign. But yeah, on the longer term scale, we need to break this falling wedge. This is on the 4-hour. Let me show you on the daily. We have not broke under it yet. We have wicked under it, but we have not had a candle close under it. We are still maintaining this falling wedge. Perhaps we come up and test up again in 92K. Perhaps this turns out to be kind of a double bottom. These falling wedges are typically a bullish indicator. Prices tightening up as we reach a certain point before we get that breakout. Now, if you're curious about this falling wedge pattern, I'll leave this down below for you, but it basically explains what it is. It tells you how long these patterns typically take. And according to this article, the falling wedge pattern has an accuracy of 74%. Now, the pattern can break out upwards or downwards, but because it rises 68% of the time, it's often regarded to as bullish. But how are you guys feeling today about Bitcoin, about the Bitcoin miners, about the market in general? Does this upcoming economic data concern you? What do you think about our upcoming GDP? How are you feeling about tariffs? How are you feeling about the potential trade war? You know, in reality, this strategic Bitcoin reserve news is massive news. When you look at Bitcoin adoption is clearly happening on a state level. On a country level, we have some of the largest companies in terms of assets under management looking at Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a part of Wall Street now. And while I have brought up some negative concerns in terms of the economy, in terms of Bitcoin, in reality, all you have to do is follow Bitcoin's cycle. Over the long term, Bitcoin will go up and to the right above all else. And you know, sometimes you need to change your mindset. Why would you want to buy something much higher in price? You're going to get less multiples. The lower it goes, the better. Please bring me back to a $20,000 Bitcoin. Please. But do you agree? Do you disagree? Would you rather have Bitcoin just continue up higher for eternity so you can never buy cheaper Bitcoin? Or do you see Bitcoin as I do, as a long-term investment, while also playing the cycles with derivatives like the Bitcoin miners, like alts? Do you think this cycle will play out, or do you think it's somehow forever going to be changed? Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.